My name is Ann Smith, and I'm a volunteer at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Today we're interviewing Bill Harlan. Do you want me, is it all right if I call you Bill?
Please.
Okay. At the Matheson Library and Archives. We have some observers. We have Mimi Carr here, and we have Ray Eberling. And I don't know whether the other two will come in, but I kind of doubt it. So, all right. Today's date is June 26th, 2019. Where were you born?
Gainesville, Florida. Alachua General Hospital. I just had my 69th birthday Saturday.
Congratulations.
So,
Congratulations. And so what year was that you were born?
1950.
1950. Okay. And so you stayed here and grew up?
Stayed here. I went to, actually my grandmother had a nursery school that I went to for, I guess, the 3-year-old and 4-year-old, or 4 and 5 maybe.
Yeah.
And then I liked it so well, I stayed for my kindergarten year was at the nursery school. It was the Three Bears house out 13th Street, right about where 16th Avenue crosses 13th Street. The Steak and Shake there on the corner. Her house was up that hill behind the Steak and Shake, and the nursery school was next door. And the big oak tree that sheltered the front yard and play area, one of the play areas of the nursery school, is still standing, and it's sort of it's some kind of champion live oak, and then separately it's dedicated to her. It's got a little plaque. I was just telling somebody that works at the Ronald McDonald House right there about this last week. The plaque, this is the Estelle Harlan oak that sheltered generations of kids or something like that on the tree. Yes. So I can go there and go right back, and I'm probably recalling photographs rather than the real event of the wooden train in the front yard and the swing set and different things like that.
She was really tuned into what kids like.
Well, music, rhythm, I can remember a lot of beating on things with drumsticks to learn to keep rhythm. And
that's very good.
She played the piano and sang. We did a lot of that, and we're all kind of, the school was in a house. So the one bedroom was the doll room, and one bedroom was the block room, and organized around those sort of general ideas. And then I guess we gathered in the living room to, when the whole group was together for the singing and stuff like that.
That's great.
So
those are wonderful memories.
I went to P.K. Young for 1st and 2nd grade. My dad was on the phys ed faculty at UF, and I guess just a lot of faculty people sent their kids to PK.
Oh, yeah.
We happened to move right when I was 56, right from the northeast side of town to northwest, and I think it finally dawned on him that I could be riding a school bus or walking to the nearby public school instead of being driven to PK, and that was easier for everybody. So I eventually went to Littlewood, but my 3rd grade year, Westwood Junior High had elementary grades also, because Littlewood hadn't been finished, the construction hadn't been completed. And so I went to 3rd grade at Westwood, and then 4th, 5th, and 6th at Littlewood. Westwood Junior High for 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then Gainesville High School.
Was that a hard transition for you?
Which one?
No,
I liked school and did pretty well at it.
Yeah.
And, made good friends. I think our neighborhood, we lived in Westmoreland Estates. We moved from northeast 12th Avenue to northwest 12th Avenue for some coincidence. And we were the first house up on 43rd Street at the entrance. And so all the houses behind were under construction for most of my grade school years anyway.
Yeah.
And so there was always a hole in the ground or a big pile of dirt to make into a fort, or and all that's developed now, but there were plenty of abandoned spaces, or
Yeah.
the wilderness in between
Yes.
Littlewood and home. There was a lot of mischief you could get into outdoors.
That's for sure.
The little ponds would spring up after
Oh, yeah.
a period of rain, or construction would create all kind of opportunities. And
Well, now,
so-
when you were growing up, were you into sports?
yeah, swimming. My dad was the UF swimming coach from, I think he started in 1960 or maybe 59, so when I was 9 or 10 years old. And in the summers, he managed the Gainesville Golf and Country Club
Yes.
pool and the teams. And the Gainesville Golf and Country Club then was where the faculty golf course clubhouse is now, and the pool has been paved over. But there used to be a pool there. I'm
Yes.
surprised at how many people that have been in Gainesville a long time just miss that part. And they asked me, the pool, there's no pool there, but there was.
Oh, yes.
And so he provided, he was my first employer. He was my first swimming coach after him throwing me in the pool to learn how to swim the first time. And so that I took to that naturally. Taught me how to dive, so I dove a little bit in high
Great.
school, but
Wonderful.
swimming primarily. And I was not particularly fast, but I was earnest. Tried to stay with it, but I didn't really progress speed-wise too much. I did some of the jobs that, like, I swam the individual medley just because I had learned all 4 strokes. That's
really?
Butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke,
Yeah.
and freestyle. Not because I was fast at it, but if the other team only had 1 swimmer in that event, I got 3rd place by default, no matter how slow or fast I was, and picked up a point for the team, for
Sure.
GHS. I also had to dive 1 year in high school for that sort of that same reason. Our second diver got hurt, and so I knew how to do most of the dives, not all of them, unfortunately, but most of them. And I was pressed into service as the second diver again for that third. I don't think I ever beat anybody, but I sometimes could get a point for 3rd
Sure.
place. And a lot
Sure.
of teams didn't have a second diver, so we were lucky in that regard, I guess.
That sounds great.
And I was the co-captain senior year, so I started seeing more, doing that sort of thing, leadership things, or being elected to something or chosen for something.
You like that?
More than just working harder or having I might have just lacked the natural gift for a fast swimmer, and it kind of peaked out at being an average swimmer. But I did those other things to be involved. I think I played football. I think 5th or 6th grade was the last time I played football. I played basketball 1 year in junior high at Westwood. Wasn't very good at either one of those. And swimming's the one I stuck with throughout high school.
I can't remember whether you had siblings.
I had a younger brother, John, 4.5 years younger, who he's lived in Gainesville except for a stint in the Marine Corps his whole life.
Did you have other people in the family that were in the service?
My dad and both my uncles, both
Were
his
they?
brothers, yeah. They're, the typical, prototypical greatest generation, or where they didn't talk about it much.
I was going to ask.
John got my brother got really interested in military history, and so he started pressing my dad more than, and I was away by then in service myself, and finally got him to talk a little bit about what he did. I knew the outlines, but what he really did in combat, he didn't talk about that. He tried to be a pilot and washed out of pilot training, and then they used him for a couple of years in the middle of the war as a phys ed instructor, which is what he was doing for the university eventually. Not overseas, but here in the different training bases in the States. And then he went to gunnery school and became a tail gunner on a bomber. And that's how he spent the very end of the war. And he was in the Pacific, based in Guam, and flew his crew and squadron flew with many others on some of the last bombing missions in the war over Japan, over the home islands of Japan. In fact, I remember him saying that they were in the air and got turned around when the second atomic bomb was dropped, and Japan pretty quickly was indicating they were going to surrender. But we had planned those missions, both in terms of trying to force an end to the war, but also to soften up the home island that we were preparing to invade in a few months after that. So, that was, I don't know whether Japan just didn't have much left to defend with, but I don't think they lost too many planes and think the home islands would be heavily defended, but I don't know if they were running out of gas in mid 1945.
That's right.
So, but he never, especially the combat part of that, he didn't talk about it. So we finally found his flight records, which detailed each one of these flights, and confirmed what he had sketched out in general about that period of his life and his military service. And then later in 45 or early 46, he was mustered out and came back here and finished college, got a master's, and then started on the faculty and picked up coaching a few years later, but started with teaching freshman phys ed, which was required. Phys ed for men was required, I guess 2 years of it. So phys ed department was a pretty big and kind of basic teaching fitness and also different sports, as opposed to academic study of physiology and that sort of thing.
And so when you graduated, was that 68?
Yeah.
What were your plans?
Go to West Point. I'd gotten selected. Just talk about how that developed as I have pieced it together, because unfortunately, my grandmother, Estelle's not here to ask about it. She died while I was at West Point. But I think I used to go to her house to spend Friday nights. And I'm not sure why. Give my folks a break. But for most of that time, John was there too, so I don't know how much of a break it was. But my grandmother and I went into town to do some shopping, and I was maybe her escort or something like that. And I think we watched a show about West Point, which I didn't remember directly, but when I was teaching at West Point in the 90s, which I hope we'll get to eventually if I let you, the Public Affairs Office had copies of this TV series, black and white TV series that ran in 1956 and 57, and that would have been about right for me staying with my grandmother. Half-hour show, black and white. You'd see young actors like Leonard Nimoy and Steve McQueen, and that pretty quickly became well known, playing cadets. Anyway, so there's about 30 or 35 episodes. I eventually was able to get the whole set to watch. But so watching that, and I'm sure she and I talked about it a little bit and kind of put it aside. And then when when I got a little older, we talked about it some more, and I expressed some interest. Every kid that I knew had toy soldiers and stuff, and that was part of, I think, more solitary play than group play. It was if we were going to play as a group, it was a little more sports oriented, but if you had to stay in it by yourself, then toy soldiers was something that I did.
Yeah.
And I asked her about going there, and she said, well, you've got to get a congressional appointment, but don't worry, I know Billy Matthews, who was the congressman here back then, and I think I can talk to him about, you've got a good record, just keep it up, and this will all work out. So I put it aside again. Finally, junior year in high school came time to start being serious about college, and Gam was still alive, and I talked to her about it again, and remember you told me about Billy Matthews? Oh, but he's not in office anymore. Don Fuqua, they had to run against each other two
Yeah.
incumbent congressmen. The district was redrawn, and they had to run against each other, and Matthews lost, and Fuqua won. And so we didn't know, we don't know him. But, you go just do it like everybody else does, write your letters and assemble your record and all that and send it in. So I got an appointment from Congressman Fuqua and from Senator Spencer Holland also. And so I knew about that, well, finally, I guess, in early spring of graduation year 68. And that became my plan. A good friend, a very good friend, down the street neighbor, classmate at GHS, got an appointment to Annapolis, and so we trained together in June, had to start there July 1st. And there it was. We flew.
Do you declare some kind of major or?
Eventually, not at first.
Not at first.
My major was National Security Studies. Everybody gets an engineering degree, though, and that's still the case now. They have real majors now. We had, I guess they were called areas of concentration, because you had a number of electives, and electives. In the late 60s, electives were fairly new. It was pretty much a standardized academic program not too long before that. But National Security Studies was my area of concentration. Every semester, you had a free period. There were four. It was like an A day and a B day, A, B, A, B. We went, including Saturday morning, which we had usually had the lab type science courses, just two of them on Saturday. And so, but one of those afternoons, you only had one class instead of two. I always took an overload. I was just exploring, I guess. And so I took an additional course every semester just because I could. And they said, as long as it's not dragging your grades down perilously low, then you can do that. And so I got a lot of credit hours there, and it got to explore literature and British history as well as more American history to complement the kind of the current events type political science, national security studies.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds like a good education you hear.
West Point's gotten better and better. Again, the teaching in the 90s, teaching law there in the 90s, caught me up a generation after mine as far as what school was like. And now my class is affiliated with the current sophomore class that just finished their plebe year as a 50-year. The class of 72 is affiliated with the class of 2022. And I've gotten reintroduced through that program at what it's like there now and what they do. They are busier now, and the academics are harder but richer. I'm so pleased with the way the academy has kind of shaken off its hidebound traditional approach to things that lasted 150, 175 years and kind of moved ahead.
That's wonderful.
With the academic program in particular.
And to go back and see those changes and be pleased about them.
Yes.
So after the first 2 years, then you have some choices about, is that what you meant by getting a major or?
Yes, so that's when you start getting your electives. I don't recall there being any electives the first 2 years, but then you've declared one or you've thought about what it would be, and then you get to act on that by picking electives in that discipline. I think we had 44 courses, and 7 or 8 of them were elective choices.
And so was there something that you had in addition to the 2 things that you took the first 2 years?
Well, what I added, National Security Studies, was a lot of more analytical courses about the civil military or political military combination, how that worked legally, its pros and cons. I remember a course about the Cuban Missile Crisis, a semester on the Cuban Missile Crisis, that brought in a lot of those other, like part of the framework around the crisis and the civilian leadership of the military and civilian government, the national government in general. All that brought together through a study of how those pieces all interacted regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis, and which had just happened, I guess, like 6 or 7 years before. So pretty fresh, plenty of experts, plenty of even some participants still around to talk to or be interviewed, to read interviews of, and all that were.
When you're in a situation like that, is everybody kind of tuned in to what's going on around the world and those discussion issues?
I think so.
Or?
Around. I mean, this was. I have to roll back a little bit and thinking of here. What was I doing, going to West Point in 1968, right after the Tet Offensive? I can remember being on a swimming team trip when Martin Luther King was shot, and Tet Offensive had just happened and still sort of winding up, I guess. And what was I thinking about going into the Army then? The lure of West Point, the way it had been part of my thinking, at least
So far.
2 meaningful times in my life related to my grandmother before. I probably could have gone here. That was my choices were really stay home, go to the university, or do something like this. And so I didn't hesitate, and didn't hesitate as far as thinking about the war. It wasn't going to happen while I was at West Point. It wasn't World War III. It was way over there, and but things could have turned out differently in the sense of going to fight. The class of '70, if you weren't medically disqualified from going into combat arms, then you were in combat arms and in Vietnam in either your first or second assignment. '71, it was a little fewer, somewhat fewer. I think class 72, my class had one guy go, a finance officer, and he was one of the last paymasters that would have to go around with a rifle and a driver and a big bag of cash to pay guys their monthly pay in the field. There wasn't any kind of direct deposit type things, type options there, and checks didn't really work. And so I can remember being on a plane with somebody headed for Travis Air Force Base to deploy to Vietnam and getting turned around. Like he had just gotten he's on the plane, gets I don't know what, he opens up a telegram and it says, you're not going to Vietnam, so report here instead of there.
Really?
And so that was happening right, as I was a cadet and getting ready to. I can remember a lot of military instruction being based on lessons learned in Vietnam and trying to make us as prepared to do a good job as junior leaders as they could. I remember for 3 years we heard, trust your platoon sergeant, trust your platoon sergeant. He's part of what he's supposed to do and knows it is train lieutenants, make you guys into good lieutenants. And then finally senior, they said, trust your platoon sergeant if he's a good platoon sergeant.
Really?
Figure that out first, so because some of them weren't trustworthy, weren't gonna help you learn things the right way. They were gonna have fun with you, play sport with you, like set you up for failure instead of set you up for success. And that was a good lesson to hear right as the end of the cadet experience was going to transition into being a lieutenant.
Did you ever talk about Agent Orange?
No, I don't think so.
I think it was kind of came to.
I mean, it was being used then, but I don't know that we knew the harm it was doing.
I think so.
So we had the age-old for West Point traditional branch selection, where you picked your branch, in order of class rank. So the number one guy got to pick among all the branches that there was a quota for, and there was a quota for most of them, combat arms heavy. And then it went down, and I picked armor, and said I'd rather ride than walk. I guess that was the that was as deep as I analyzed it, I think. And then a month later, you grouped by branch and picked assignments based on your branch. And so my buddy and I wanted to go to the 82nd, and he was armor also. So we were in the room together and picked. He went to the tank battalion in the airborne division, and I went to the cavalry squadron in the airborne division. And so by, well before graduation, I kind of knew where I was headed, both the schooling I would get on the way to Fort Bragg and then what I would be doing at Fort Bragg, more or less.
In the meantime, did your family write to you and worry about you?
Yeah. I don't know how much they didn't express worries. A lot of things are coming back to mind. The maddest I've been at my parents, and I remember this night pretty vividly. My grandmother Estelle died of a stroke. And they thought at first she went to the hospital with stomach pain or some kind of pain, and they said food poisoning and sent her back home. And she had a little stroke, I guess, and then she had the stroke that killed her. And my parents she was dead and in the ground before they told me she had died. And I was mad at them for a dozen years, I think. Every time things would start getting warm and affectionate, I'd think of that. I said, well, we knew you were busy and you couldn't get down here anyway. Hell, surely it could have come to her funeral as among anybody else's, and would have. And I can remember we had a pay phone booth in the hallway of each floor of the barracks. And I can remember standing in the phone booth crying my eyes out, having heard that, and then trying to get past it. And I was just, I thought it was anybody I wanted to say goodbye to, it was her, and wasn't able to do it. And I thought my parents really messed that up, really screwed that up. And I let them know that. And then I finally got over it. But they wrote, and I had a couple of different girlfriends from here that one girl came to visit. One girl came to stay the summer in New York, in Manhattan, and work at Bonwit Teller department store for the summer after plebe year. And so we saw each other every weekend, which was a real gift. I feel like there's a lot left to talk about where I'm kind of stuck at West Point. But I met my wife. I knew my wife at GHS, 2 years behind me, Betty Herlong. And senior year Christmas, my good friend from Ohio, who was the diver on the swim team, I went out for the swim team and didn't make it and became the manager, a manager, and then eventually the head manager. And the coach, Jack Ryan, had preceded my dad as the coach at Florida, maybe by one coach for a short time in between. That helped. He wrote me a letter for the admission process and everything. So, but he didn't recruit me, and he didn't. I was the guy getting third place when there was no other competitor.
Yeah. That's carefully
So anyway,
worded.
so John, my friend from Ohio, was coming down for the first part of Christmas vacation. Then I was going to leave Gainesville early and go and stay with him for at least a weekend before getting back to West Point. And then he couldn't come. Something happened, in family thing or something, he didn't come. And Betty was going to go. I arranged for Betty to go out with him as, like a double date thing or something. And I saw her at the high school. I came to give a talk at the high school about West Point, which if you do that at the different holidays, you get extra vacation days. You get to leave West Point early.
Sure.
Cadet public relations, I guess. So I saw her at the high school, and I was in my uniform and everything, and she bounced up to me and went, "Hi, Bill. Good to see you. When's John coming?" "Oh, he's not coming." And I love telling this story when she's around me, because she always gets mad when I say it. "John's not coming." Her face just dropped. And I said, "Don't worry, I'll take you out." And that was our first date, and we were madly in love by the end of that vacation. And
it worked.
And it worked. We didn't get married for 2.5 years of a long distance relationship, but we maintained the relationship over that time, and got married when it was good for her. And she was 2 years behind me in school, and I was at Fort Bragg. She had a chance to be an intern in occupational therapy for 6 months in Chapel Hill, near Fort Bragg. So we said, well, we'll get married before your senior year starts, because we're gonna, we can live halfway in between or something, instead of waiting till you graduate. So we got married in 1973, a year after I finished West Point and a year before she
that's great.
finished at Florida.
That's a good story.
There are parts of it that she doesn't like.
Now, after graduation, what was your assignment?
Well, I went to, so I had 60 days of graduation leave. I'm sure it's shorter now because they squeeze so much extra stuff in for the cadets. 60 days, so in August, I reported to Fort Benning for jump school. And the Thursday of ground week, tower week, air week, I guess, I don't know, the jumping out of planes week. Near the end of ground week, playing football barefoot in August outside of the apartment, like in the courtyard of the apartment complex where we were staying, right by the front gate of Fort Benning. I broke my little toe. And so each day of ground week, maybe all the way through, we did a little run in boots and jump boots first thing in the morning, not so much for fitness, but to smoke out the guys that had twisted an ankle or broken a little toe or something and couldn't run because the jumping might, or even falling from the tower might exacerbate that. And so I fell back and was finally walking behind the formation that was running, and got exposed as, having something wrong with my feet. So all they did was tape the broken toe to the one next to it, right. but I couldn't continue. So I left Fort Benning and went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for the armor officer basic course, because I could do that on crutches or rehab while I was doing that. And then I came back to Benning for jump school in December and ranger school from the end of January till the end of March, and got to Fort Bragg, got to my cav unit at Fort Bragg the middle of April. And we already had our wedding planned, so I walked in there and told the squadron commander that Bill Harlan reporting for duty, and I need 2 weeks of leave in September. It went from there, but I'd gotten strict orders from Betty, don't mess that up. We gotta have a little honeymoon. She was going to take off from school for the time, so that all worked out. We got married here and moved to Sanford, North Carolina, which is pretty much, it's like 35 miles from Fayetteville and 35 miles south of Chapel Hill, and that's where we lived for 6 months until she had to come back here for her last quarter of senior year, and I moved on post at Fort Bragg.
And then after that, you had another
Well, we got interested. A bunch of us were living in the same apartment complex, a bunch of classmates, and several people started talking about law school, and enough to take the LSAT aptitude exam. And I was pleased with my score and thought this was another message, like the old TV show about West Point that I used to watch with my grandmother. And so they had just started. It was about the second or third year of the Judge Advocate General's funded legal education program. They had one called excess leave, where you could essentially leave the Army, not get paid. It was like going into the reserves, I guess. And every time you had a vacation, you could work on active duty and get some pay for that. But most of the school year, you were a student, and you were like in the inactive reserve or something, I guess. And funded legal education was keep your salary, just go to school, work in a JAG office in the summers. But that seemed like a pretty good deal. It had a service commitment after it of I guess 2 years for every year in school. But I got to know some of the JAG guys at Fort Bragg in the division in the 82nd when I was working in the division headquarters, and thought, well, that's kind of like you get to jump and be a lawyer at the same time. You know, you get to be a soldier and a lawyer both. And they're going to pay me to go to law school if I get selected for this. You know, that wasn't too hard to figure out. And so the program, I think, was designed by the Army to put officers with some combat arms training and experience into the legal branch, where most of their junior officers were coming right out of law school and didn't have much of the officer training. You know, they had 12 weeks of it or something, like a basic course, but not a lot. And so it was thought of initially while I was in it anyway, it seemed like a heavy West Point. It was designed for West Pointers, or something. And I didn't, the connotation of that was not very satisfying. But I did, it was a good program. I went back to Bragg in the summers. I kept jumping in the summers with the JAG office, first summer in the 82nd and the second summer at 18th Airborne Corps and Fort Bragg headquarters. I had jumps with both of them and finished up master wing, 65 jumps through, I left with 55 and I got the last 10 during those 2 summers. And so I think we were all just gathering badges, but we were gathering credentials as soldiers, so they wouldn't just think of you as the lawyer in the rear with the gear and that kind of thing. And probably still thought that. One of the serious conversations I had before I went to law school was with the adjutant of the Cav Squadron, who said, you're pretty qualified for this. You'll probably get it if you apply for it, but you got to accept you're going to be in the Army for a while as a second-class citizen, as a JAG officer, coming from the combat arms and going into one of the support branches. And you ought to think seriously about, can you live with that, being thought of within the Army, that you've really become a part of, a second-class citizen. And I thought, well, I'll just be the best second-class citizen they've got. I'll be a JAG officer that knows about frontline service and dangerous stuff, and tries to support them the best I can, not for my convenience, but for their interests. Whoever my clients are. So
had you ever thought about law school before?
I don't really think so. In fact, one measure of that is junior year we had a 2-semester constitutional law, criminal law course in the required curriculum. And unlike one of my classmates and good friends who also became a lawyer, who that's about all he studied junior year, and of course his grades suffered some overall, but he knew the law, and like I say, became a lawyer after he got out of the Army. I was bored by it. It was kind of a bland political science course to me, and I kind of see how that happened, but I wound up teaching the same course when I was back there in the 90s, and thought, it seems like a pretty lively course, and there's a lot going on that you can relate it to and all.
Yeah.
Impeachment and the O.J. Simpson trial. While I was there was a lot of things that cadets were aware of that they asked about to their lawyer or their lawyer teacher. But I don't think I thought about it seriously. Again, West Point was about as far ahead as I thought. Not even thinking too much about going to Vietnam if the war continued, and hadn't really thought any farther ahead.
Sure. Well, do you have to specialize when you finish law school? Do you have to say what?
Well, I knew, and Duke was a good place to go because there was a military law expert on the faculty, Robinson Everett, who became an appellate judge for the military on what was thought of as the military Supreme Court. It was subservient to the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, but the U.S. Court of Military Appeals, the highest military appellate court, and so we had unlike I'd imagine most other law schools, we had a seminar in military law, in the seminar in the Uniform Code of Military Justice for a semester under Judge Everett, and so that was certainly a good course to have under my belt when I went to the JAG, started the JAG training. I tried to take all the trial practice and evidence and those criminal and civil procedure courses that I could, knowing that I would be trying court-martial or defending at some point, and I did. So Duke it's thought of more as a corporate law school, especially then. It's pretty broadly based now. It's expanded as I've seen it develop. But I remember somebody saying in a casual conversation, I never thought I'd wind up at a corporate law school. And I thought, well, I'm at Duke. This is a corporate law school? Why did I pick that? But I was just selecting the courses that I thought, and some of them that I took weren't, because you had to fill up a schedule, but most of what I took was relevant to JAG work as I understood it then, and proved to be true. I probably could have taken more international law, but I took, like I say, prepared me for trial work, and then the sort of the basic principles of military justice and military law that Judge Everett taught.
So when you finished at Duke, then you go back to West Point for?
No, I didn't go. Not for the teaching assignment. That was 20 years later. But I went to. Betty. So that was 1979. Finished Duke. Betty joined the Army then. My wife.
Really?
She had moved twice already from when we got married, and worked at the Fort Bragg school system, testing kids who might have learning disabilities to try to steer them and help the teacher, reach them effectively. And then she worked at the Veterans Hospital in Durham while I was in law school. And so she had started from scratch, and then started from scratch again. And as I was finishing law school, and I'd gotten promoted to captain just before law school started, so halfway, 3 years as a captain. The Army was looking for occupational therapists, which is what her degree from Florida was, with experience, because they had students too. They'd put through OT school, and had to serve 3 years. So they were getting out.
That's right.
They had just enough to stay in for a career that they had their colonels and majors covered, but they didn't have any middle managers. And so they were looking for people to come in with some work experience in OT already, and she fit that bill perfectly. And she came in as a captain. She started as a captain. So that was a good career move for her as well, as far as starting a career that built on what she had already done. They basically treated her 5 years as if it was federal government service, because it really was. I mean, Durham VA and Fort Bragg schools, as if it, I guess, equated that to military service and brought her in as a captain. And so we moved together 3 or 4 times through 10 years. The only drawback for her was maternity leave.
I was going to ask.
We had our son in 82. Yes, 82. Near the end of her first assignment. And she got 6 weeks maternity leave and then back to work full time. And it took us a while to get pregnant the second time, but when our daughter came, or when we were pregnant the second time, she decided she wasn't having any of that. So she resigned her commission after 10 years and she made major and had been the occupational therapy clinic chief at Walter Reed, a lieutenant colonel's job. Her boss left and said, this is who should run this clinic. Well, not somebody new. So she had a serious job and had worked at Landstuhl Hospital in Germany, where all the soldiers from the Middle East get deployed back through or treated there. She'd worked in two serious jobs, but she left the Army and got another serious job in Washington, but they gave her 3 months. She basically started work and then delivered a month later. And she had negotiated 3 months full-time off and 3 months half-time off with our second child, our daughter, who just finished med school herself recently.
Really?
Actually. So
oh, great.
that's a long time in between. That's almost 30 years in between. But anyway, so that was Betty liked the Army just fine, and we liked the idea of we might have eventually been separated, and we were separated for a couple of months at a time when I would have to go to a school or something, or she would. But we basically moved our household intact several times to Germany and back and DC.
That sounds great.
And so that suited her very well. And so I'm trying to think of what I'm skipping here. So anyway, so I'm finishing law school. She joins the Army. I had orders to the infantry division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, but they didn't have an OT assignment there for Betty. So we wound up going to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and that's where our son was born, and had assignments for both of us there. And it was a little slower paced JAG work for me there than a big troop installation, but it was fine. And so that was my first JAG assignment.
Did you like it?
Yeah. Well, and I like the work. I tell folks even now, that like the paralegal that worked for me at the county before I retired first time. You're just like those sergeants I had at Fort Sam who tell me, "Sir, you mean you only put that guy away for 3 months? I could have done better than that, and I haven't even been to law school." I get a lot of razzing, and I was the only prosecutor, so they didn't have anybody. I didn't have any other officer to compare myself to. Just the sergeant's version of what I should be like and what I should be doing, and so they squared me away eventually and did a good job for me. But I took some of that guff at the beginning. Yeah. So, and I liked the intellectual scope of it, as well as being a soldier like the people I was interviewing or working with.
Sure.
And so there wasn't much not to like.
Yeah. Worked out well.
And then I went to from Fort Sam. We went to Charlottesville for a year to the JAG advanced course, academic year's worth, and then went to Germany for 3 years.
Whereabouts?
Betty was in Landstuhl, and I was in Kaiserslautern, which, you think of in the middle of what's a Kreis, I think it's called, which is a county in Germany. Main highway going east and west. My barracks or my headquarters was on the east end, and Landstuhl was up on the hill on the west end. And we lived in the middle, just south, in the first village south of that area. And Kaiserslautern, this area of Germany, is towards France. It's southwest, West Germany. And this was just before the wall fell. This was 83 to 86, so a few years before the wall fell. And we went to Berlin. We drove across East Germany on the corridor that was prescribed, and dealt with Russian guards on each end of it and all. And we went to Berlin a couple times. We did a lot in Central Europe. We didn't go too far to the edges, but we went to Scandinavia. We went to Paris. We went to England, southern England.
And you were there for how long?
Just 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. And then back to D.C. I had a job. I was the junior of two, a colonel and me as a major, I guess. Major. Legal advisor to the Inspector General of the Army, 3-star. Henry Doctor, good guy, and good people man, good manager of people. And did a variety of things, mostly on the investigations and the policy side.
Yeah.
The IGs who were inspectors didn't have a lot of legal issues that came up. Every now and then they would. This was just when the Army Inspector General was turning from a checklist type inspection where it was a gotcha, and I can remember at Fort Bragg being you'd have a half dozen additional duties, safety officer, bulletin board officer, some stuff like that, and you'd spend a couple of nights before the IG inspection straightening up the bulletin board or something as useful as that, and something you kind of ignored the rest of the year, it seemed like. But and if you got too many check marks on your checklist that meant you had messed up stuff, then company commander got in trouble and passed it down to the lieutenants, and that was the way that was. The IG system under one of General Doctor's predecessors as IG, Richard Treffry, became a fix the problem. Let's say there's a pay problem in the unit, and you can go in there and use your checklist and ding the pay officer and the finance captain in charge of it or something like that. Or you can look for why the problem exists. You can search for root causes and fix those. And it may not be this guy's problem at all. It may not be the unit commander's problem that Sergeant Smith can't get his pay straight or something like that. Maybe something deep in the bureaucracy. And that's what this new way of IG work on the inspection side was aimed at. And Treffry put the life cycle of the Army on one big piece of paper, and he knew it all, the details about all that stuff. And he said, here's where you start, figure out where the problem is, figure out the connections to it, who else is involved, and then go out and solve it. And don't beat up the poor company commander or the guy at the bottom just because he's closest to the soldier with the problem or the issue. Find out where the problem really is and solve it. And that was a fun time, I thought, to be in that kind of work. They also had a bunch of old colonels who had the gumption to take on general officers. Any general officer that got in trouble, you couldn't hardly investigate them on their own post because they were probably the commander of the post. Yeah. So the Army IG would handle those, general officer misconduct. And that's where I did most of my good legal work, I guess. And enjoyed that a lot. It was like being a a urban police department's legal advisor, I guess, because you had, you were taking on some powerful forces sometimes with powerful allies.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the Army leadership, like the independence that the IG brought, and kind of protected us from those influences that could have thwarted the work. So I'm in the Pentagon, working for the IG, and decide that we liked living in D.C., the center of the universe. We thought this was 86 is when we got there after Germany. And so I got advice that the way to stay in D.C. longer was to go to Korea for a year unaccompanied with a follow-on assignment back to D.C. And that's what we pulled off, I guess. We worked out. And just in the spring of '89, when I was about to leave for Korea in the summer, we found out we were pregnant finally with our second child that I talked about. It took us a long time to get pregnant. So now I think that probably contributed to Betty deciding to get out of the Army, not just the maternity leave, but that I was going to be gone, and she needed some more flexibility, I guess, than having a full-time job herself. So that's when she resigned her commission. So I went to Camp Casey, South Korea, 2nd Infantry Division, as the deputy staff judge advocate. And they came over, I guess I got there at the beginning of July. They came over at the end of August on a tour kind of to Shanghai and some other places in South China, but flew over a week before the tour was beginning and came to Seoul, and then we made a day trip up to Camp Casey so they could see where I was. And this is Betty and our son, who was 7, about to turn 8 that fall. And then they went on the China trip, and I went on part of that with them on leave. And a friend of mine from the IG work, well, two different friends came over. The first guy came to visit, not visit me, but came to visit Camp Casey. And he told me, this is one of the IG investigators, a colonel. He said, "You'll never guess what I just did. I sat on the JAG Lieutenant Colonel promotion board they usually have 3 JAGs and 2 non-JAGs on a 5-officer promotion board like that." And I said, "Whoa, you did? Well, you probably saw my file then for Lieutenant Colonel." And he said, "Well, I might have." And I said, "Well, aren't you going to tell me anything?" "No, I'm sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you." But you'd think a lot less of me if I told you that I had been on that board, knowing that you were going to get bad news when the results were announced, wouldn't you? So he, hinted at me, and so I got promoted at the end of that tour. But that was one visit. The second visit from a former IG colleague, he came over and said, "So I got to back up. Betty called one night, day for her, night for me, and said, 'You've got to go in and get this certain kind of medical test because they did an amniocentesis on the baby, not yet born, the fetus, and there's some kind of abnormal gene or the abnormal something. It's one of the chromosomes one leg of one of the chromosomes is reversed or something like that. And it's benign as far as they know, but they want to know what the origin of it was. Did one of us pass it down, or did it just happen?' So I had to go, my law school classmate and good friend was stationed in Seoul, and so I went, stayed with them, and he took me to Seoul University Hospital with peeling linoleum on the floors. It felt like AGH in the 50s when I was born there, must have been. And They sterilized the needle that was going to draw a blood sample from me in a Bunsen burner. And I thought, boy, I think medicine's in other parts of the world, it's progressed from here. But the Army hospital couldn't do this test, I guess, so I had to go down there. And it turned out that Betty had the same thing, and so problem solved. If I'd waited, I probably wouldn't have had to make that trip and take that test, but no big deal. It's just that the answer was, she passed it down, no problem, don't worry about it. And then this IG friend came over and said, well, you know, you're over here in Korea, are you going to get home for Christmas when the baby's due? I said, well, I'm trying to decide whether to come in early December when she's due, or when the baby is due, or wait until Christmas so I can have Christmas with the family like normal. And think of Daniel as 8 years old then, thinking, you know, that our son, so I could have a normal Christmas. And he said, well, our first child was stillborn. And I know what my wife she would have never forgiven me if I wasn't there when something happened. And, you know, I think you ought to try to get there for the birth. And we talked, and Betty expressed great confidence after having been through this little thing with the chromosome, that everything was going to be fine, it all felt right, all the other checkups have been. And come for Christmas, mid-December, maybe the baby will be late, you know, who knows? You know, you can't really plan that kind of trip. And if I came in early December, I couldn't, and she didn't deliver, I couldn't come back again, you know. Right. So Elizabeth was born on the 6th of December, and my folks came, and then Betty's folks came, and she had a coach who was a friend of hers from the Army that came down for it. So everything was fine, and I had a good Christmas with now 2 children instead of just one. And then we had 2 years. We had a hard time getting pregnant with Elizabeth, and child number 3, our other daughter, Catherine, was just a gift. 2 years later, she came without us even trying very hard, you know, without all the stuff we went through to have Elizabeth.
Yep.
So, and I was back in the second DC assignment after, you know, the bargain that I made stuck, which doesn't always happen, but go to Korea for a year and come back to DC.
So in DC, you worked at the Pentagon?
Pentagon for the first one. The second one, I worked for a joint all services and some good many civilian program office about some classified programs that the Army had some difficulties with classified programs and kind of loose controls on money, because we can't tell you what we're spending that money on because you're not cleared for it, you know, was what so they started clearing lawyers and putting lawyers inside these programs, and I was in a program like that. And enjoyed it. It was pretty high speed. It was
I bet.
This was in the last part of George H.W. Bush turning in Clinton the last 6 months before I left as far as president. And there was the president and his chief of staff, and General Treffry had now retired, the 3-star I mentioned, and he's now the military assistant to the president, and my boss worked for him. So I was 5 heartbeats away or something like that. And so that made it pretty heady stuff, and a lot of variety, a lot of different, where I was the general counsel, so whatever happened, whatever happened. And we had secrets to keep, but we also had programs run and interface. It was a lot about coordinating among many parts of government. And, so it's very interesting work.
I bet.
And then I went to teach at West Point.
Oh, that's when
after that assignment. And then I think I've spoken maybe enough about that. I taught the course that bored me as a cadet. And I tried to make it less boring, I guess. And we had 3 kids up there, and it was a great place for kids. Betty was kind of unplugging from. I mean, she had gone back to. Every time we moved, she'd start over, basically. Yeah. And in New York, she taught a graduate program, an undergraduate program at a different school, and a junior college program for OT techs at a third school, all part-time. The graduate program was the closest to full-time, but she had 3 different locations, and you managed most of that out of our house.
Of course, everybody loves driving in.
Yeah, in New York, and we dealt with some bad snowstorms. That winter, that was 93 to 96. I was the electives director, and then I was the deputy department head. All of us, including the department head, taught, but if you had one of those other jobs, you were kind of a 2/3, and instead of 3 courses, you taught 2 or something. Mm-hmm. I love being back on the campus, sort of, doing all the activities I could that you did some of as a cadet, with sports and concerts, and as a cadet, I'd been my still very close friend today. He and I were DJs for 2 years on the cadet radio station, little FM station. Back then, it broadcast through the wiring in the barracks or something like that. It didn't even have an antenna. And now but in the 90s, and even more so now, it's a bona fide FM station that goes out over the air, and you can get it in the local area as well as all over the base. And so when we got to know, when I was on the faculty, I got to know the guy that ran the radio station. He was an NCO, but he was in charge of the radio. So he was a military broadcaster, and convinced him to let my friend from Ohio come to West Point for a week, and we'd do our radio show again for a week. And that was just so much fun. I was the head manager of the swim team as a cadet, and then I was the faculty rep to the swim team on the faculty, and in both roles announced the home meets. So that was how much fun I was having as an instructor. Teaching the course, making it less boring, radio station a little bit, and then the home meets for 3 seasons. That was putting a lot of stuff back together that I'd enjoyed doing as a cadet. It was quite I should emphasize how I benefited all through this. Some assignments more than others, but the teamwork aspect of being in the Army, and that permeates. It's not just the frontline guys, it's maybe more important for them, where you really are, watching somebody's back, because their lives are in your hand, yours in theirs. Our lives weren't too much at risk in the JAG office or the Department of Law faculty, but we still had a team approach that you just saw all around you, and you'd been taught, and did some of it in an earlier part of the career. So it was a team effort, and I think, I guess they maybe had that when I was a cadet, but we made the most of it. So you were a subject matter expert over a certain part of a course, but you didn't have to learn you didn't have to keep up with all the legal changes and developments in all those areas, because somebody else had the other areas, and we had lesson conferences every week, so you would hear from the subject matter expert of what was coming up next.
Yeah.
Here's a new case to make sure they know about, especially because it's relevant to the military somehow. Here's a new technique to how to present this material, and that was quite a gift.
I think so.
The power of a team effort like that is not to be denied. So after West Point, we started, this was now 96. We were starting to become aware of our elderly folks. Betty's in Micanopy and mine in Gainesville. Hers were about 8 to 10 years older than mine, so they were getting towards 90, and mine were just past 80, I guess. And so we came south for whatever job was open, and I went to First U.S. Army in Atlanta, at Fort Gillem on the south side of Atlanta, as the staff judge advocate. And we were the headquarters that had the active duty headquarters with responsibilities towards all the reserve components, Reserve and National Guard in the Army, east of the Mississippi. There used to be 6 of these U.S. armies, Now there were only two, us and Fifth Army in San Antonio for west of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was more of a, I was told then, there was a more robust training of the reserves, training responsibilities on the Army headquarters where I was, and evaluating. There were a lot of reserve units were starting to be called up to serve active duty deployments in the Mid-East then, and had to come fit right in. There was eventually National Guard headquarters were becoming the headquarters over active divisions, active Army divisions and active Army units. So they had to be up to par. And every now and then, a person, an evaluator team under First Army would evaluate a National Guard or Reserve unit and say, no, you don't get to go to, Iraq because you're not ready, or wherever it was. So they were starting to take that really seriously. So you were both one part of First Army was training those units on their drill weekends and summer camp and that type of thing, and another part of it was evaluating them when they were given orders to deploy. And usually a deployment of 6 to 9 months would have a couple months on the front end of final train up at larger scale, and then evaluation before they would go over. And so we did all the legal work supporting that training and evaluating mission, as well as we trained legal units. The reserves has LSO, legal services organizations that are just a bunch of lawyers, and some NCOs and paralegal type NCOs and clerks and all. And they would go to I know a friend of mine, they cobbled together in a rear area for the Gulf War, behind the front lines when they were getting ready to invade Iraq back then. They put together a support area, and there was a lot of civilian contracts. They didn't have a lot of units there that brought their own lawyers with them. So they got volunteer lawyers throughout military lawyers throughout the JAG Corps, and had to put together a support structure for that legal office that just came together out of nowhere, out of just put together. And a lot of those were the kind of units that we trained, that my office had a role in training. Not before the Gulf War, but before that kind of deployment. And so, again, serious business. There was, and we were a half day's drive from Gainesville. So if we could, Betty had been coming down at least once a month for several days to make sure her folks got to the doctor when they needed to, and had groceries and stuff, and we were sensing that was coming for my folks, and so we just needed to be closer.
Yep.
And so when that assignment was over and said I had 28 years in, just 27 and 9 months, I guess. Probably could have gone for another assignment. It probably would have been in Washington, so we'd have been farther away from Florida.
Yeah.
And we said, no, we don't want to move north anymore. There's nowhere we can really go farther south, so time to get out and retire. And so we moved back here then.
And that was when?
I retired on March 1st of 2000.
That was probably a wise.
Well, it was a necessary move, I think.
Yeah. We all kind of go through those,
Yeah.
helping families. When you look back on all the different kinds of your service, what was most rewarding? Or were they each rewarding as they came at you?
It's hard to say. I think I can group them, that rewarding assignments and less rewarding assignments in two groups. It's hard to pick the most rewarding because there's such variety. I really enjoyed teaching, but that was, I guess, contributing to future officers as opposed to solving problems and taking care of things for current members of the force. And the the second job in Washington under the White House Military Office was, I mean, I got exposed to government in a way that I hadn't ever before, much deeper down away from it in the Army. But so those were more intricate problems, I guess. And you didn't have, most of the time in the Army, you had somebody you could go to who could say to that recalcitrant, whoever it was, company commander maybe, or a staff officer, you know, if you could convince his boss's boss maybe that this guy was, you know, he needed to get with the program, he'd be gotten with the program, you know? And in this job that was as many civilian parts of government as it was military, you know, worrying about the connections, the relationships and all, there wasn't anybody like that. You know, I mean, there's a lot of big egos and stuff. So sorting through that type of constituency, or not constituency, but that complex set of relationships to get my part of it accomplished was a pretty complicated challenge, and rewarding when it worked. You know?
That's right.
Taking care of young soldiers' problems that are you know, to them, they're maybe nothing to us looking down, you know, you can handle that, son. Gosh, I don't know what to do, you know, and solving something for somebody like that that's in a legal jam of some kind, or facing some serious consequences of one kind or another. There's a lot to be said for that. You know, so I guess the less appealing job, less rewarding jobs are more where there was either sort of a lack of that teamwork spirit, or just more than the usual share of knuckleheads to have to deal with. You know, that just you couldn't really appeal to them with anything reasonable, and you couldn't always, you know, kind of clobber them somehow with somebody else's authority or something, and get the right thing done. You just had to roll with it, you know, and so there were. Or a boss that still thought of the legal office and maybe some of the other support offices as, you know, inconsequential, you know, don't bother me with your problem, you just got to solve my problems, and, you know, you never get any recognition or thanks or something. Yeah, and so I had a couple of bosses like that, and I tell people now, I had a problem like that in the Army. If you just waited a year or two, you'd move or they'd move, and things would be better one way or the other.
That's right.
I had the same boss in the county attorney's office for 15 years, you know, and mostly the same people. Fortunately, it was a good office and had that good teamwork spirit that I'm talking about.
That's right.
But there wasn't any getting rid of your boss or moving on to a different boss. It was, you were there.
Well, I love the story about how you wove your family into that kind of thing. Sometimes, you know, I'll get all the way to the end of the story and you say, yoo-hoo.
They're very important, and they were a very important part of that. And I always tried, I think we both did, like I tell people that when they say, well, did you go to the vineyards in Italy and eat all that great food and everything? Well, we ate some of it, but we saw Europe through the eyes of our 8-year-old. So we went to all the zoos and Legoland a couple times, and, you know, different kind of things like that, and had a great time. But we missed some of the adult fun, I guess, that people seem to want to talk about. You know, I mean, you didn't go there, and you didn't go. No, I went to Legoland. Did you go to Legoland? We went to the beach in the Netherlands. So.
Now, are you affiliated with the military anyway now? Are you reserve?
You count? No, not like that. I was going to ask if you count Veterans for Peace that runs the Memorial Mile. I'm affiliated with. I'm a member there.
Yes.
And have some different jobs during their big activities in the year.
That's great. They put a lot of effort into that.
Yeah, it's mostly just like a, you know, kind of like a grassroots thing. You know, it's a bunch of people with, you know, folks that have done it before, so they know what to do, but it's a bunch of volunteers getting together.
It is. What questions would you like to include in this that I haven't addressed?
Well, you let me ramble, so I think I got most of it out. Some of my I have some close high school friends still, but the group at West Point is, it seems like we've drawn together as we got older.
Mm-hmm.
My friend, the fellow DJ, Chuck Coleman from Canfield, Ohio, is still the guy that, he's sort of the glue that's keeping us in touch a lot.
Somebody.
He's on different committees at the class level, mostly planning reunions and stuff. But we are in pretty close communication as a group of about 20 men.
That's great.
All the same age, roughly.
That's great.
Not roughly, almost to a year. All over the country.
Yeah.
We're really behind an effort to make real this affiliation between our class and the 50-year behind us class, the class of 22 that are cadets now. That seemed to, I don't know for sure, but for a long time, for 100 years maybe, there was a thing called the ring melt ceremony, and they would take, class rings would be donated from deceased graduates or I don't know how else. And some of the older class rings would be melted down, and the gold in those rings would be added to the gold being crafted into the 50-year later classes, class rings. And so that was meant to be a connection between the 50 or older class and the younger class. And they've expanded that now to a 4-year program. It starts between your 45th and your 50th reunion, so there's plenty of opportunity to talk it up. And so 2 years ago, when we had our, I guess it was a year and a half ago, we had our 50th, no, 2 years ago. They outlined this program. It was about 3 years old then, at this level, level of detail and all. And Chuck is, my friend Chuck is making it, I think our company is ahead of any other ones that we've heard about in reaching out to the current cadets during their plebe year and saying, we're here, and we're not just here as in a symbolic way. We're here to mentor you if you want it, or to give you another perspective. They get mentoring from all sides, I think, but we're here one more that we've been through the military career. Many of us have been through a civilian career, either whether it started 5 years after graduation or 25 years after graduation. And we might have some insights that you would find useful. So we're strengthening our bond with those kids now. And by the way, from me interested in what's West Point like now, I'm getting another generation's worth of that viewpoint from kids that are going through it, not just from the official channels or something. And I'm profiting a lot from that. And
it's wonderful.
There's a girl from Gainesville that is in that class that's not in, I was in Company E3, so we've reached out to the current Company E3. She's not in E3, but I've still been in touch with her. Yeah. And she's doing quite well as an athlete and a student. And they have them going all kind of different directions in the summer there. It's a much richer overall experience.
It's wonderful.
There's not a lot of sitting around, getting hazed anymore.
Yeah.
One of the biggest changes, if you stop me when I'm rambling too far, but one of the biggest changes is, and it had started some when I was on the faculty, so in the 90s, but it's even really, really strong now. It used to be the sophomores, the yearlings, were the hardest. They made the hazing, they put the H in hazing or something. They were the worst at it because they had just finished their plebe years. So we show up a month later for the summer training, and then in the 2 months after that into the school year, and they wanted to make our lives miserable, and most of that was done by wasting our time. So you'd be doing meaningless things. Supposedly it would sharpen your mind to memorize all this claptrap and all meaningless things, so that you would have to function under. You would have to learn how to function under pressure, to get your schoolwork done or to get your true military assignments done. Sometime in the late last century or so, they made it like the Army. Instead of making it like a fraternity party, for 4 years, where the seniors are making the freshmen do all kind of crazy stuff, that tradition or ritual or something.
Yeah.
They made it so that the sophomores, each sophomore had a plebe. And your job, sophomore, is to make that plebe succeed. Not just help, encourage, not just be there when they ask, but stay on them, but make them, it's their success that you're looking for, not put the pressure on so you can run off the weak ones or something like that. And that's what you do in the Army. Maybe not, your sergeants do it more than lieutenants do, but you want to make those sergeants do that part of their job. Make this soldier succeed, because you get out and you're getting shot at, and that he may save your life, or you may save his life or something. And so that's just such a welcome change. And it's not just a leadership experience for the seniors, maybe. It's a leadership experience for 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
And you get so much, the country's getting so much more value out of its program.
You get a lot of practice.
Expensive program than I think they were before.
That's wonderful.
And I'm proud of how West Point has grown and changed in ways like that make it just a better experience.
Well, one of the things you said that you were working on was becoming a mature elder.
Betty got me business cards when I retired, and it has little slogans like that. I didn't pick that, but I'll try to wear it well.
Okay, I was going to say, because there's those of us out here that would like the advice.
Of a mature elder,
like
a wise elder.
How to say no when you've got too much to do, and I'm having trouble with that.
Well, you know when you have not said no and the impact there. Mm-hmm. I think you just have to call that to mind, because I eventually got to the point where I could say no most of the time when, I guess, without, if you were just going to be a volunteer, you kind of wanted something out of it yourself. So I gravitated towards volunteer opportunities that were enjoyable and with people I liked, rather than just, I thought I would do more volunteering with strangers. I kind of gravitated towards volunteering with friends. And, I think within a certain, you realize, even at maybe a different level in a different way, but you're having a positive impact from your volunteering, even if it's not necessarily saving lives like many good programs do or something. But I didn't know anybody that was saving lives, so I gravitated towards the Micanopy Historical Society, for example, and find ways to contribute there and sort of strengthen friendships rather than trying to form new ones, I guess. And it's still kind of hard to say no sometimes, but at least you're doing it among friends.
Well, sometimes you're just on max, and that's, people understand that.
Well, people do seem to. I went back to work 2 weeks ago to try to fill the shoes partially of a lawyer who died, and I'm working part time, and the rest of the fifth day of the week, I'm working 4 days a week. The fifth day is my Micanopy Historical Society activities in the morning, so I'm keeping that up. And so going back to paid work with a boss is kind of a good way to help you say no. Somebody that wants you to volunteer for one more thing, or something. You say, no, sorry, I'm working now. And they seem to understand that, or act like they do. They realize it's futile to try to pester you into another volunteering assignment.
Well, this has just been wonderful.
I mean, you run this program, so that's pretty satisfying volunteer work, it seems like.
It's very selfish of me.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful, wonderful interview. I appreciate your candor. And
well, I've talked to you before, when we were talking about setting this up, about, I wish I had daring stories of combat and suffering to tell, And I have to always make the distinction between that I was a Vietnam era veteran, but not a Vietnam veteran, or a combat era veteran, not a
I think
combat veteran.
anybody can understand that.
As most people are, I guess, even since World War II, most people in the service have not been in combat.
That's right.
Even though that's where the hardest work is done, and what you hear about most often, maybe the most consequential work. But it takes a lot of support people to make those guys
That's right.
and gals now successful at the pointed end.
Yes.
And so I was like I said, my answer to being a second-class citizen, I'll just be a very good second-class citizen.
Yes.
And thought I tried to live up to that.
Yeah. And just think of the impact you've met.
Well, I hope so. I know I've made a lot of good friends out of it. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'm in your debt. I look forward. This is some of this is an outgrowth of not hearing from my dad about his experiences.
Yeah.
So my kids or their kids get interested. I can, even after I'm gone, somebody can hand them this material that you've created today, and that you're going to create. And
sometimes when people say, "Oh no," or "I was just this," or I wasn't really a hero, I'm saying, it's not what it says here. It says veteran.
I just watched Band of Brothers again before and during Memorial Day weekend, and a couple of those guys, in their older lives when the film was made or being interviewed, and I guess it was Dick Winters, the main character, said, "Granddad, were you a hero?" "No, but I was surrounded by them," or something like that. "I was in a company of heroes," or something like that. And of course he was the main hero, I think. I mean, he got the Distinguished Service Cross the day after D-Day. I think it was the day after, when they destroyed some artillery that was pounding the beach for the troops landing behind them. And maybe it was D-Day, maybe it was later on D-Day. Anyway, pretty soon. And I'm not a hero. I just was surrounded by heroes. And that's the kind of modesty that...
There's all kinds of definitions.
Kept kids from learning about the heroic work of their fathers and grandfathers.
And when you have this written down and we put it in text, and somebody across the country just opens it up and reads it for the first time, the personal story, the personal, I did this, it isn't a history book, it isn't what somebody thought. It is so powerful. It is so powerful. And your words just make it.
Well, I hope somebody will enjoy it. It's likely to be family members more than anybody else.
That too.
Kind of who I did it for, I guess.
Well, I think that's...
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
It's a great program you run.
May I say something?
Oh, not.
I just want to say that I found it absolutely fascinating. And the second-class citizen is balderdash. I thought your description...
Cancel
about
that.
the
She said balderdash.
that thing about the IG that you were doing.
Yeah.
Keeping the Army, because we all remember that the Army was not doing so well.
Yeah, there were times.
I mean, I'm a civilian, and all I was doing was reading Time magazine. But the Army, towards the end of Vietnam, especially in Germany, was a mess. And I understand that that's where Colin Powell got his thing, is he straightened the Army out. So it was tumultuous, and people were very anti-military. And to just hear. Perhaps a lot of it is just you and the way you approach life. But I was just very impressed with, the Army sounded like she knew what it was doing. I mean, in many ways.